Hey guys, it's Scrubby back again with another spooky video here. You guys seem to really like these, so here's another one. You guys know the drill. Like and comment if you want more. It helps them do better, and let's go. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border, and he never even batted an eye. But while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression. Which, from this guy, is about the equivalent of trembling lips in poop-stained pants. I'll tell this first story in first person as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, heading to Loretto to pick up a load. It was early in the morning, around 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those two-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as it usually is. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's something crouching over the carcass. I remember thinking this is either a guy taking the antlers as a trophy or he's just a sicko. As I got closer, I can still now see that this guy's eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing it to his face, and at this point, he stops mid-motion and looks at me. Not my truck, but at me. He, or whatever it was, stands up, and that's when I see that it's a huge thing covered in brown hair. And I remember thinking at this point, oh my god, this thing is standing on a tiny shoulder looking at me, eating a deer. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay it on and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me. Again, not at the truck, it's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there, and he knows where I'm sitting. And as I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete, which is an old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield. Being tall and difficult to see around is what it's known for. This thing is giant, and I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the crap out of me, and to this day, I don't really know what it was. I actually haven't told anyone this because I think I imagined it, but I've been having nightmares about this, so I think I need to get it off my chest. I was hauling lumber on 36th East between Fortuna, California and Red Bluff, on my way to the 5 South. This was in 95 or 96, right before the coastal lumber industry folded. Route 36 is basically a glorified logging road. It twists through the mountains, ranges, and goes to one lane several times. Anyways, I got a late start, which was okay, as I like driving at night anyways. It was probably around 10 or 11, and as I crept into the mountains, there started to be a nasty bit of fog. I rounded a corner and suddenly there were all these deer just standing in the middle of the road in the fog. It was kinda creepy just seeing them all standing there in the middle of the road because usually they're running across it, not just standing there. I blew my horn and they all turned and looked into my headlights, their ears twitching, the buck's antlers casting long, twisted shadows into the fog. I blew my horn again and they lazily walked to the side of the road. I idled forward towards them and I looked out my driver window and saw the bucks and does warily looking back at me as I drove through them. But that wasn't the creepy part. I reached the peak and started back down. The fog on the eastern side started to abate, but as I rounded the corner, I saw a guy walking down the road, down the middle of the oncoming lane with his back to me. He had a shoulder-length black hair, wet and stringy from the moisture that had been in the air. He wore a faded blue wool-lined jean jacket, hands in his pockets, and darker jean pants. When my lights hit him, he swerved to the shoulder of the lane, giving me room. But then the most horrifying thing happened. I was going maybe 25 or 30 at this point, but as I came up to him, he bolted right in front of my truck. The last thing I saw was his eyes, wide black eyes, and his mouth open in a silent yell. A black pit in his white face shining into my headlights before disappearing under the horizon of my hood. I stood on the brakes, the cab and the trailer behind hopping. I remember thinking, Jesus, 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 as I hopped out of the cab and ran back behind the truck. I saw him walking back up the hill, behind my truck, hands in his jacket pocket, illuminated by my red brake lights. He looked back at me, his black eyes and black mouth now grinning toothlessly. Then he dashed into the trees at the edge of the road. I was so scared I didn't call out. I just got in my cab and drove on. I still dream about those wide eyes and that unholy mouth disappearing under my hood. I hope the dreams stop now. I want to preface this by saying that I'm not making this up, I'm not a writer, and I'm not embellishing, and I don't care if I get internet points for it. I'm not a long haul trucker, but this happened during a long drive at night about 14 years ago. Four friends and I decided to drive out to Weatherford, Texas to look at some new Hondas at a dealership after they had closed because we were stupid high school kids and didn't understand the concept of trespassing. The ringleader of our group drove us in his 96 Honda Civic. We took the 730 south towards 180. Around 20 minutes into the drive with no lights, houses, or other vehicles in sight, his CD player turned off mid-song. No one touched it and he didn't have controls on the steering wheel. We all thought it was weird, but nothing paranormal. He turned it back on and we completed the drive. After looking at the cars, because the dealership was off the highway, we left to head back to our hometown, and we ended up taking the reverse route back, this time north up 730. We started joking about the possibility of aliens and what if that was what caused the CD player to turn off, and about 2 minutes later, around the same spot as before, it happened again. This time, it went from music to static. At the same time again, and I'm not making this up, a black human-shaped figure materialized out of one of the bushes in the highway, walked into the road in front of our car, and I remember the light from our headlights illuminating the space around him, but not the figure itself, like it was absorbing the light. There was no shadow that I could see. This was not a guy in a body morph suit. It was like looking at a two-dimensional cartoon of the blackest color you can imagine, and it was reaching its arm out at us. We were going about 55, 60 miles an hour, and we had to swerve to avoid it, and I remember as we passed it that it had no distinguishing features. No face, no fingers, no clothing, no shape, other than a dark void. We all screamed at the top of our lungs and almost went off the road completely. After our driver regained control, we sped off as fast as his car could go, carrying 5 people, and we had to calm him down so we wouldn't wreck. We were all freaking out, asking each other what to verify, to verify that it wasn't a hallucination. We all saw it. We all had the same experience, and when we got back to our town, we all just stood in shock and didn't know what to say or how to explain it to anyone or if we even should. There were no reports of anything near it encounters on the news, nor were there any reports of a body turning up in the area or a homeless guy harassing people or really anything. I'd forgotten about that incident for many years until a few months ago when I was hanging out with one of those friends and I asked him if he remembered that. He does, and we still have no idea what it was. I was driving my flatbed from St. Helena, California to Wiley, Texas. This happened somewhere near the Texahoma border. I picked up a hitchhiker. He was standing by the side of the road with a trembling thumb out. Trembling from the cold, I thought. Soon I would realize that it was trembling because of the fear. The trembling of the man who looked as though he'd seen a ghost definitely shook me a little bit. Where to, I asked. Please, I know this is weird, just take me to a bar. I need a drink. I will buy you a drink or a hot sandwich, I just don't care. Get me there. I thought this was odd. I picked up many hitchhikers in my day, and such a request was never asked. As I was about to say, get lost, buddy, whatever you're selling I'm not buying, I looked into the man's eyes and saw pure terror. Something compelled me to open my passenger door for the man, and he entered. At the bar, the hitchhiker began his tale. Earlier on the night of torrential rain, he was a hitchhiker seeking a ride. Next to the road, he sat with his thumb out for hours, waiting in the rain. A few cars passed, but none slowed. Frustrated, the hitchhiker was about to rest his thumb and find shelter for the night, and then he saw headlights. Headlights of a very slow approaching car. The hitchhiker eagerly approached the car, waiting for it to stop. Oddly, the slow-moving car continued drifting forward. Maybe the pace was slowing or the car was moving at such a low speed, but it never came to a complete stop. The headlights pierced the rain, and as the hitchhiker stood confused, will the car stop? Maybe I'll get in. I've never seen a car drive this slow. Anyways, the hitchhiker decided to try to just jump into the car. He stumbled to the rain as he pulled the passenger door and had a seat. To his horror, there was no one in the driver's seat. There was no one in the back seat, and the car was bare, but it just kept moving forward. The headlights still on, but now in front of him as he looked out the windshield as the car continued to creep forward, the hitchhiker, scared, quickly exited the ghost car and ran for miles. He rested, ran some more, rested, and then ran some more, and finally after catching his breath, stuck his thumb out and stood by the road. The hitchhiker then saw headlights, but this time the car was driving at a reasonable pace, and it wasn't a car at all. It was a flatbed truck, and that's where him and I had just met. I had seen no other cars on the road that night. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws were around and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now, but I'm not too sure. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift, where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or a fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain, and he's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long it would take us to get home from the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing, like the odometer, mileage, markers, all that stuff. One night, after already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much either. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep himself alert in the wake, saying something to the effect of, "I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be if I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then closed his eyes, took a breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing, which woke him up with his gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely, but it was a matter of seconds between reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy road going 60 miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up. I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I hadn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that feels pretty close to spiritual. Anyways, guys, I think that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate you pressing the like button, letting me know in the comments section down below what you thought. I promise longer videos are going to be back soon. Just, felt like making another spooky story for you guys, and yeah, don't get anyone pregnant if you do. Make sure they're hot. I'm out. Peace.